Hello everyone, Brick Horizon here, and this time we have the Y-Wing from the original trilogy. I've made a bunch of Y-Wings in the past, but this one specifically is minifigure scale at 1 to 45, which is the smallest version, and I originally made this after being inspired by Boffman Bricks. However, he has his own version with some great details and play features. Since then, I've made a few changes and even created instructions, so if you've seen the original video on this, then let me know in the comments below, as I'll be unlisting that a week after this is released, so make sure to check it out if you're interested. But like I've said before, I did create instructions, and you can find them on Rebreakable or through the link in the description. There are so many details on this that I might as well start with the most obvious things, and then I'll go over the changes from the previous versions. One of the important parts to playsets is the ability to add and remove an astromech droid, which you can do here since I made sure to leave plenty of room for it. When LEGO makes its Y-Wings, it generally keeps the astromechs facing sideways. This allows for them to have a stronger structure without sacrificing the stability of the neck. This can be a problem, but with my design I made sure to take advantage of the stock technique and build this so that it's connected on the bottom and both sides. This whole area is very detailed, especially with the building techniques, like how I use studs not on top multiple times in the same area to get the right effect. This whole area is loaded with details, but before we get into that, I do want to talk about probably the most important part of this MOC, and that is the cockpit. Usually, you'll see MOC designers use the piece specifically made for Star Wars ships or will brick build theirs. In this case, I did something very different. I used a newer piece, being from the Dune Ornithopter, which is an amazing set by the way, and I think anyone should get this, whether you're a fan of Dune or not, because it just looks so cool. Anyways, this piece is from the front end of the ship, and was actually designed with old LEGO windscreen pieces in mind. It's very surprising that they haven't decided to use this in a LEGO Star Wars set yet, and I hope they do it in the next Y-Wing. However, there are a few limitations brought on by this design that impact the way that the minifigure interacts with this MOC. One of the problems that LEGO Star Wars is running into is making playsets so small that the minifigures must lay down. I call this the coffin scale, and unfortunately my MOC does run into this problem, but only because of the pieces I used were very limiting in the amount of room available. This isn't directly an effect of the windscreen piece, as there are a number of other factors, like the way that the head of the Y-Wing was constructed, with details being the top priority, and function coming slightly after that. Now a minifigure can sit inside of this, however you will need to remove a little bit more than just the cockpit to do so. Right behind the cockpit is the main turret. This one was built very simply, and I think that adds more than trying to overcomplicate the design. This is also one of the things that remain the same from the original design. I do want to stick around this area before I go anywhere else, because I spent a lot of time getting everything right. It's built fairly simply, but once you see what I did, it will become very obvious. The main area is built regularly, with plates stacked on top of each other and leaving enough room in the front for the cannons. The side and angle pieces uses just hinges to keep that angle from the nose in. One of the details that I often find overlooked on Y-Wing MOCs is the extra markings on the nose. Although I didn't include them for simplicity, I would recommend making this small change if you like the more asymmetrical styles. It's also reminiscent of the BVA or Rebels design, which bridges the Clone Wars and original trilogy designs, which I've made a few MOCs on previously, so let me know if you'd like to see the instructions for those. I'm also working on a modified model of this version with the Rebels design since it was requested. Looking at the underside of the Y-Wing, you'll notice a lot of details. There are extra guns under the Y-Wing, and I also included the markings on the underside. The only detail that I didn't add to this is the slight tilt of the cockpit, but at this scale I didn't want to risk the integrity of the head, especially with how much was going on, and possibly ruining a stable model. Going towards the back, you'll notice that the greebling doesn't stop at the top. I don't know what the function of the greebling is in universe, but you'll notice that the most of the amount of color is on the yellow of this ship. In a lot of models there is some orange, and I wanted to include it to break up the monotony. There's also some at the top, but I'll bring that back up when I get to it. A lot of the underside is also tiled off, and I wanted to include these round canister pieces, which are a part of the hyperdrive system. There's also this darker round part. I'm not sure exactly what this does, but it's most likely related to the bomb dropping feature. My favorite part of the underside is probably the detailing that I got under the arms using the hinge bricks. This is supposed to represent the grills that are probably for heat ventilation, but they look good nonetheless. Moving back to the top of the arms, you can see that I tried to keep them relatively smooth and not make it too cluttered. since there are already so much greebling in the middle. And there are so many details that I'll just point out some of the interesting parts. One of these include the orange markings that I said I would talk about earlier. I used a lot of brackets and especially clips with these flat silver bar pieces for the pipes. Alternatively, you could also make this the pearl gold color or brown like the original LEGO sets, but I'm waiting to save that for my BVA model. I also think it was cool to include the paint roller pieces, and I also used a tireless wheel for this cylinder in the middle. If we move to the back towards the hyperdrive, you'll see how I used another technique to get these pipes in the right place. For these, I used a T-bar with these angle clips, and it works really well to get this detail in. Lastly are the engines, and I've made a lot of changes to these, including changes since the short I made yesterday. I know I've been slightly behind on videos, but I hope to make it up with this and my review of the Juggernaut and UTAT alt build, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, like I said, I had to make a few changes to the engines. Originally, they were built with these 4x4 round bricks with pinholes. However, I discovered that they were over $1 each, and I made a few changes because of it. At first, everything was all light gray, but I had been debating on adding this extra detail, which is the second darker ring before the yellow one. Unfortunately, these pieces do not exist in sand blue, so I had to settle with dark gray, but they are growing on me, and I think it looks better this way. I also updated the structure that holds the back part of the engines in. I knew it wasn't as stable as it could have been, since there were two different disconnected parts that would probably hold together with friction alone, but I decided to make sure and modify it to be perfect. Now there are some extra details like the grills here, as well as these bumps, which aren't technically accurate, but they look visually interesting, so I thought it was alright to keep them, so I didn't have to remake this entire engine area. The final change that I made to the engines was at the very end of them. Before I said that this MOC was inspired by Baughman Bricks, and he has made a really great Y-Wing MOC, but I made this before his and only updated it recently. The only thing that I decided to take from his design when I changed things is this, but it was in order to make my pieces less expensive. In my first design, it looked really nice using this curve piece, but it also took over $1 in light gray. So I fixed it using this piece that was already incorporated into the build, and I think it already looks better. This also makes everything more stable, since it forces all the pieces to be connected at the end. The Y-Wing is one of my favorite starfighters, and even though I do wish I could have one in real life, LEGO is enough to keep me satisfied, for now. Remaking this video and finally creating the instructions showed me how good of a MOC this was even before I decided to make some well-needed changes. I'll also make another video on the next updates and the other Y-Wings. If you enjoyed, then don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments what you'd think about this MOC or what other creations you'd like to see from me next. Anyways, if you would like to pick up the instructions for this model, then you can find it on Rebreakable or through the link in the description. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.